I being a hypocrite for running a business about social class mobility and helping people move up in their careers in a capitalist system? This is a question I've been asked a lot recently, and so I'm going to answer it. I'm Dr. Anna Kolschmidt. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist. I research the unwritten rules of work for the working class and neurodivergence, and I talk about the invisible barriers in workplaces that keep people from moving up, keep people pushed out of power, keep the people who already have power powerful, and I look at race and gender intersections there as well. So I understand the question, and I get it, so I'm going to talk about it in this video, namely answering the questions: what is the problem with capitalism, since some of y'all still don't get that either? Why I don't boldly and literally proclaim being an ist, socialist, communist, capitalist, all of that. Why I usually talk about culture and not capitalism as a system, though I have several videos on capitalism as a system. While we're talking about, is there an ethical way to have business under capitalism, we're also going to talk about, is there ethical consumption under capitalism? Can you navigate a system from within? Can you, as Audre Lorde said, use the master's tools? What am I doing to navigate this divide? And what questions do we all need to ask if we want to get out of the current system? Let's talk about it. Naming the problem. What is the current issue that people have with capitalism? And I will say I'm not going to address in this video so communism is perfect, so socialism, like that is a different topic. That is an either-or mentality. There's a lot of space in between like full-on communism and full-on capitalism. We are in late-stage capitalism right now in the United States, and we are seeing a very strong push to convert from that to fascism. And it's not a huge jump, but we are seeing it. Capitalism has never existed without exploiting labor, from chattel slavery and colonization to where we are now in offshoring, to sweatshops, human trafficking, the abuse of labor in general, of seeing the shareholder profits skyrocket and everything gets more expensive while your wages remain stagnant. It also requires constant growth at any cost, which is just not feasible. We have finite resources, so it requires very short-term thinking, and for as attached to it as many people are, it really hasn't been around that long, though I have made several videos about how it is rebranded monarchy in a sense. People have always and still do literally die from this system. That doesn't mean they don't die from other systems. For anybody who's in black or white thinking who's still with us. But people do still die from deprivation of insulin, from being unhoused in extreme weather, from in those sweatshops that we don't say we allow here, but that we definitely turn a blind eye to while we get profits from it. To mention the long-term impact of what we're doing to our natural resources and who is going to impact first: the global south. Food is a very real problem. All systems have pros and cons, but I predominantly talk about capitalism because it has all the power concentrated. I am an American, and that is an American system that influences the rest of the world. And so as an American, I feel a responsibility, and that is what I have the most experience working in. Why don't I call myself a socialist? I get asked this a lot in my comments, or I get called a communist, or I get called a capitalist, and I've never used any of those terms to describe myself. Why is that? As soon as you start using those words, 99% of people don't know what those mean. That's very intentional propaganda from McCarthyism in the United States. Great book on that is called American Midnight. I read it last year. I would say great in that it has a lot of information, though it is a bit repetitive and it could be written more interestingly, and I would have reordered it a little, but content is important to know on it, and what happened before and in between World War I and in between World War I and World War II on that intentional shift. That the U.S. wasn't capital before that. We were capitalist before we were a country. We had chattel slavery. Again, connections with monarchy. The intentional shift to make sure people do not know what those words mean, and anything that isn't what the current system is part of the Red Scare. So I don't use those terms a lot because a lot of people don't know what they mean, and that is a systemic and intentional, it's a systemic design with intentional uses. The other reason I don't usually use those words is because people instantly turn their ears off. And I know that because I used to be one of them. I've been very open before that I've been raised in what I call Catholic-evangelical, very extreme Catholic but evangelical adjacent Christian nationalism, deeply conservative. I voted Republican my whole life until the 2016 presidential election because that was a big shift for me, and also even then I still had a lot to unpack. So I know that it didn't make sense to me when I heard people say capitalism's problem. I didn't, because those connections were not made clear. I have found more success in conversations with people and if I really self-reflect and look at my own history on talking about the issues, who they impact, what they are, before assigning labels to them. That has gotten more and more difficult in the past few years with diagonalism. I've made videos on diagonalism, taking the term of a word and changing what it means to make conversations about it harder. This was a very intentional strategy used by Steve Bannon during the 2016 election. Great book on that is Doppelganger by Naomi Klein. It's one of my favorite books of all time. So that's part of why I don't use those terms as frequently to describe myself as an identity. Another reason is that, and this is the scientist practitioner in me. Yes, I have a PhD, but I am an applied PhD. I'm not an academic. Theory is very important. We also have to learn how to apply the theories. That's what's called, what we call the science practitioner gap, is when the ivory tower does a lot of research, but then it does not consider, some of those researchers don't consider how it applies in real life, and vice versa. Practitioners don't take best practice that we've seen in evidence-based research and apply it. So there's a gap. So as someone who's a scientist practitioner, I'm always thinking there's the why and how do we implement this? It's something we know about when you talk to people about their beliefs. They can passionately tell you why. And when you ask them how they plan to implement those beliefs, they tend to moderate a little bit. They tend to step back. They either can't answer your question or they start thinking through all the processes you have to do to get to the point. Who are you going to negotiate with? How are you going to pull people together? What systems would you slowly change first and in a way that isn't going to be disastrous? You can think, how do I not make this worse and make people go hungry, while also recognizing that right now people are hungry. It's one thing to say you support a class revolution. It is another to say how you plan for that to happen when the most marginalized people are going to be impacted first. And destroying a system without a plan to rebuild it is just destruction. For those in the camp of wanting a revolution and saying nothing can be done and the wealthy will always win, that's a very one-sided view of history. Even as a white woman, I can tell you that if nothing ever changed, that I probably wouldn't be allowed on this app. So I wouldn't be able to tell you who I have voted for because I wouldn't have that right. And there are a lot of other groups who have had to come much farther because they had so much more taken away from them. So yes, we have seen history repeat itself in cycles of greed, and we have also seen people push back and say, not anymore. It also comes from an extreme position of privilege to expect everyone else to do the revolution for you or to know that the revolution wouldn't immediately unalive you. Finally, if you're not organizing and making efforts now while the system still hasn't collapsed, though is crumbling, why would we trust you to work with us when it does? If you're not willing to do it now, are you going to be willing to do it later? All the while, most of us can't skip a paycheck. We knew that during COVID. That is why a lot of people didn't want to quarantine. Loneliness and also survival. It gets blasted in the news that it was all about haircuts. There were those people, and most Americans, while we are in the richest country in the world, cannot miss a paycheck. So what are people supposed to do? Not get a paycheck while we built this revolution? This is why you have to think of the how, even if you understand the why. Why do I talk about culture when it's just capitalism? Let's talk about the role of culture in capitalism. The best way I can think of to explain this and what makes sense to me is talking about the cultural cycles framework, which is not my framework. This is by Hazel Markus, a researcher at Stanford. When I was working there and doing research there, the highlight of my time there was meeting her. She's much further in her career than me, decades of research. I've recommended multiple times her book, Culture Clash, or Clash. Really fantastic way to look at what happens when cultures interact with each other, and a foundation for my work on class culture clashes at work. The idea is that there are 4 layers of cultural cycles that impact each other. The biggest is the overall idea that is informing the institutions, the way policies are built and shaped, the interactions, how people interact with each other, and the individual, the I, what we think about ourselves. Notice the arrows go both ways, and this is what makes it complex, what makes it not so simple or not that deep, and what makes solutions difficult. The idea, see, it's complex. The overall idea shapes the institutional level, the policies, the written rules, all of that, the organizational policies as well, which shape how people interact with each other, which shapes what we believe about ourselves. To change the overall idea, you have to go back through those 3 layers. You have to go change what you think about yourself, change how you interact with other people, vote to change the laws, change the policies. That pushes back on the overall idea. But that's really hard to do when the overall idea is still present and people believe in it. They're not going to vote to change a policy if they believe in the idea, even if that policy is hurting them. They're not going to interact with people differently if they believe the overall idea is true. And they're going to believe what they've been told about themselves if the overall idea is true, if that is what they believe. So, in capitalism, the overall idea, shareholder value, everybody else, nothing else matters. The overall idea is maximum value. Money is king, more than human life. That shapes the policies, the economic structure that you're in. Capitalism is one of them. Shapes the organizational policies, the laws of the land, etc., which dictate how people interact with each other. The laws of the land reward some versus others. If some are allowed to work for pay and others aren't. And then if you change that, if people look at you and say, you don't deserve to be here, you're not supposed to be here, they just let you in. You're a DEI hire. Or I have to treat you like shit and backstab you even if I don't think that, because only some of us are allowed to have money and get by. And so you are my competition and you're in my way. And that when I see something happen to other people that I'm like, they must have had it coming, because my overall idea says that this is fair, that hierarchy is natural, and that it's all about just maximizing profit. Anybody would do this. Anybody would do this. It's totally normal. And that shapes what you believe about yourself too. And why a lot of people are angry. They're angry that this idea that they believe is true is not happening for them. And what they believe about other people, this is attribution theory, they didn't make it because they didn't work hard enough, but I didn't make it because something's unfair. And then some people still believe the idea, but have a more negative connotation. I guess I'm not good enough. I guess I'm not good enough to deserve insulin. I guess I'm not good enough to not have to worry about paying my bills. I guess I'm not good enough to deserve housing. So how do we change this overall idea? We have to recognize in ourselves that we've bought into a lie, that we haven't seen it come to fruition, or that the idea itself is harmful. We have to change how we interact with other people, what we attribute their success to and what we attribute their failure to. And of just having one way of looking at things. Oh yes, everyone deserves it, or like everyone works hard and gets what they deserve, or everybody's lazy. Like, there's nuance. And we have to change our institutions. We have to demand that these rules are not okay. These limitations are not okay. And the way you do that in a capitalist system is by being conscious of where you spend your money. Because if shareholder value is supreme, if greed is the main goal, that is the only way to make a difference. And we see little wins when we do this. Jimmy Kimmel got put back on the air pretty quickly when people were like, oh no, we're not taking this. But we don't stick with it long enough or organize enough as a group to see real big change. We haven't shut down Amazon, even though most people can tell you they're abusive. We have to work through all 4 layers within ourselves, together, and what we accept to change the overall idea. All of these have to work simultaneously. And if there's no ethical business under capitalism, then there's also no ethical consumption, which is also another phrase that I hear a lot from people in my comments. There's no ethical consumption under capitalism. I hear this a lot, especially when I talk about turning down a brand deal, because I have a large enough social media that I do get reached out to by companies to do brand deals. Have you seen me do any? Not yet, because it hasn't aligned yet. Am I waiting on the perfect company? No, I don't think one exists. But it's been too far of a values gap so far. True story, I have been reached out to. One of the first companies that reached out to me about a brand deal, I did a quick Google and found out they have been caught not paying their suppliers. My whole thing is on symbiotic relationships between leaders and people and supporting the working class. I cannot put your product on my page. Absolutely not. And I think by nature of the work that I do, that I'm probably showing up in some companies like, oh, we need a repairer, and then let's get the working class person on here. And if I've talked about that, which I haven't a lot, then people, oh, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, make your paper. There's that temptation. And if I was in a more desperate situation, and because I don't want to like morally judge, sometimes you have to, right, to survive, but I'm not there right now. I get the point of there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. A really great show that showed us that was The Good Place. That even giving your mom flowers for Mother's Day is actually terrible because of what happened to the people who picked those flowers. I get that, and I also just cannot be black and white enough to not realize that there's a difference between, yes, if I buy something from Amazon versus if I buy something from a small business. Like something I've really struggled with is someone who's just released a book and who made a point to self-publish and didn't even try to get a publisher because I didn't want corporate influence in my book, and I wanted to be able to not just send all the profits to a predatory organization, is should the book even be available on Amazon? And I'm such a small creator that I didn't feel like I couldn't have it on Amazon. And also I have an international audience, and I didn't know of another way to get the book internationally besides Amazon. So if you're hearing this and you're like, girl, there are other ways, let me know in the comments, please. I can still take it off Amazon. But the line for me was certainly not having only available on Amazon, which is a much cheaper option. And the audiobook, it's going to be a pain in the ass for me to do. I could do it way cheaper with AI and on Amazon, but it would only be available on Amazon. All the money would go to Amazon. And me, but contrast that to Barnes & Noble, who again, not a perfect company, but they have been actively talking about the importance of literacy and not banning books. So I don't see spending money at Amazon and Barnes & Noble as the same thing. And I certainly don't see it as the same thing as spending in either one of those companies, as opposed to a mom and pop bookshop, especially if it's secondhand, and then you're also recycling. So while I get the point of no ethical consumption under capitalism, it also seems like a cop-out of either the nihilist approach, everything's tainted, so why bother trying, or absolutism, I can't not cause any harm, so I might as well cause all the harm and order everything from Amazon Prime because nothing matters. It's a way to also absolve yourself from any accountability or thinking. We can't always make 100% great choices that we want to, but we do have an obligation to reduce harm when we can. We all participate in harmful systems. You are probably watching this on a phone that was made with exploitative labor. You've probably bought food from places where the manager or the leader, or at least at the corporate level, has been busted by the Me Too movement. And I know for damn sure you have streaming services to show movies that Harvey Weinstein was involved in. No ethical consumption under capitalism is an observation of systemic constraints. It is not permission to stop trying. It is not an excuse to treat all options as equivalent. The full context of that quote is that individual choices by themselves are not going to change the system, and that we have to make those individual choices together. So when you hear that phrase, ask yourself, are we talking about a systemic analysis, or are we trying to justify our behavior? Let's talk about another phrase that gets used a lot here, the master's tools. The master's tools cannot be used to dismantle the master's house. This is an Audre Lorde quote. Some people interpret this to mean the system cannot be changed from within. And in this context, some people say that means that any money in business cannot be used to reduce the harms of capitalism or dismantle it. But that misses some of the key context in which Audre Lorde delivered that quote. Because it's true that the master is never going to give you the tools to harm them, but that also means that you're using the tools in the same way. If someone gives you a knife after harming someone with a knife, you have the option to use the knife the same way they are, or to stab the fucker who gave it to you. Audre Lorde used that phrase in her speech at a feminist conference that only had one panel of Black feminist scholars. As I've also talked on here a bunch about, white feminism did not include Black or poor women. She was critiquing how that conference used systems of exclusion, tools of exclusion, to claim it was fighting oppression while still oppressing Black women. She was not saying don't use money or don't work within institutions. She was critiquing a specific problem. When marginalized people are tokenized, brought in, used as the sole representative, and then people in power give themselves a pat on the back for being such good white people, while making the people who are being oppressed by the system use their labor, usually for free or nothing, to address their own marginalization, while the people who are benefiting from it do nothing and continue the problem. This also happened with the 2020 DEI re-spark of, I can't tell you one, how many people in DEI leadership were white women who'd never done any work in that space. And also how much of it was led by mostly Black women, but other people, Black men, Latinas, Latinos, Asian people, etc., who were not given any more money or a different title and just expected to do that on top of all their other job duties. And as we've seen, 2025, when Trump came down on all that, kicked all those Black women out, said, all right, thanks for nothing, bye. That's the master's tools, and using them in the same way the master does. That's being the master. It is not necessarily the tools themselves alone. It is also the logic of oppression that is the problem. And Audre Lorde also campaigned for interdependency across difference. She wrote, without community, there is no liberation. And this also shows the importance of people working inside and outside of systems. I'm of the belief that you need both. And I wasn't always. But we know from civil rights movements, you needed people outside of the system campaigning for change. You also needed judges within the system who were like, yes, we need to make this difference. You needed lawyers pushing it through the courts. You needed people in Congress getting out of the damn way. You needed money, funding, people making those movements, even funding the marches, making sure that those people weren't hungry while they did it, the transportation to get to these places where they were doing that work, bail money to get them out of jail when the inside the system isn't aligned. But you also need people within a system to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't lock people up for protesting. Just a thought. Different people will have different approaches, will have different talents, will have different areas of privilege, will have different access. And when we finally get to the point where we get out of our individualist thinking and say, what role can I play in this? Because there's not one right way to fix this. There's not just one way that if we just do it this way, it would work. And that's a part of white supremacy culture thinking, which I've made a lot of videos about that. That's on my Culture Frameworks playlist. But it's also, and this is why I almost always hear these questions on why it's just socialism, it's just capitalism. I almost always hear these from my fellow pals. Almost always, because we're the ones with so much internalized individualism that we don't see how things work together, collectivism. We also don't see, and this is a big part of our white privilege, how our actions are shaped by culture, the impact our actions do have, and learning how to work with people when you're not the only one in charge, when you don't get to make call all the shots, when you have to do give and take. That's a very, I would say, intentional part of white culture. I'm saying white American culture because we made other videos about that. The part of being a white American is letting go of your previous cultural identity, Polish, German, etc., and subscribing to white Americanism. Another video. But I almost always people being like, not do anything to revolution, or I don't understand, it's not my fault, it's capitalism. We almost always share skin tone. Because we're not going to have to deal with the same consequences. Not none, as we're seeing. There are class differences there too, but not the same as Black and brown people. And we deeply do not understand that we aren't just individuals existing in a vacuum. We didn't just fall out of that coconut tree. We are part of a system that is interdependent with people and nature. So arguably, the master's tools, they cannot be used in the same way the master did. That does not mean that we cannot seize the knife. Now, what am I actually trying to do? How does this all tie into my business, all that? My mission, my business is to get people into leadership positions who have ethics and give a shit. That's like the mission statement. I struggle with the idea that money inherently corrupts because I think that is still how my gut feels. But I also am actively unpacking, and I'll probably make another video on this, and the idea that anyone would do it if they got into power. I'm seeing that as less and less true. The more I learn, and the more I even spend time in nature, the more I think of the idea of we would all do it, or this is just nature, nature competes. No, nature is also symbiotic. Nature also supports each other's growth. I think that's a classist patriarchal lie that also intertwines with white supremacy. I'm gonna make a separate video on that. So I do struggle with the concept of money, but I'm unpacking that I don't know that money is inherently corrupt, because you also need money to lead movements. You also need money to feed people. It is how money is hoarded that is why we're in the situation we're in. And because we have these beliefs, this is why it also feels like part of the narrative. Because we have these beliefs, there's also this belief that good people don't seek power and don't seek money. And that keeps all the money and power with the bad people. And I've made several videos, especially in my Dr. K. Reed's playlist, when I talk about the book, Why Are So Many Incompetent Men in Leadership Positions by Dr. Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic, great book, talks about how we have built systems that reward psychopathic narcissistic traits. So we do need to stop falling for the same facade of seeing somebody who's extremely charismatic as inherently good. We also need to be careful not to just believe someone's great when they come out and tell us that they're a socialist or anti-capitalist or whatever, and think about what they're saying. Think of the history behind that. Napoleon portrayed himself as a liberator when he went to places and took them over and became a dictator. Nobody comes in and is like, hey, I'm going to take all your money, let you starve, exploit you for labor, start concentration camps. What? No. We need to learn to look for those signs. We have to also realize there are multiple types of power. Not all power is exploitative. My friend Mariana Ortega has made great videos on the different types of power and how we do need power. We just need power to make change, relational power with ethics, and to use power for good. And then not all of that is extracting for yourself. I'll see if I can find her video and link it here. So that is my goal. My goal is to help people unpack this association with that you have to become them, that power inherently corrupts, and that you're a bad person if you seek leadership positions. Because we as a society desperately need good people in leadership positions. And we as a society need to know what that looks like. So my goal is to work at multiple levels of the cultural cycles, to help people understand the beliefs they have about themselves, the beliefs they have about the system, how they operate with other people, what is meeting people where they're at, what is learning a new skill versus what is exploiting, being exploited, manipulating, and gaining enough access to push back on those institutional levels and to not take on the mindset of, I have to do it, so you have to do it too. I have to suffer, so everyone else has to suffer, or it's not fair. And I also have to be mindful in running a business to not create policies and institutions that do the same thing that I'm talking about. I have to hold myself to that standard. And that's difficult because inherently what I do, I ask questions like the ones that inspired this video, right? That people don't always ask everyone. But that's good because you shouldn't be blindly following someone who says I'm ethical and doesn't practice it. So I'll tell you the things that I do as I'm trying to put systems in place to not perpetrate the same harms that I seek to address. You can hear them as excuses, you can hear them as inspiration for what you're doing, etc. You make that call. Okay, I titled this video, Can Business Be Ethical in Capitalism? That is your decision, that is your choice to make. I'm supplying the information of what I have, but I'm not going to make that choice for you. So decisions I've made is one, I have multiple price points. The cheapest service I have is my $8.99 book, $8.99 ebook version, that it has a decade of research in it, recommendations, most of my information is right there. The next tier is my school community, $15 a month. It's a little bit cheaper if you can buy an annual plan, but I know we can't all do that all at once. I do live weekly group coaching sessions there for affordable ongoing support. This is really ideal for people who need the weekly support, who just, especially if you're in a really toxic work environment and you just need to feel like you're not crazy, great place. It's also great if you are newer in your career and you can't afford more expensive coaching, but you want to learn the rules along the way. Again, if you're brand new to unwritten rules, the book is best place to go. Book and the over 1,000 free videos I have on the internet. Organized in playlists. If that's a little less overwhelming, go to the playlist section on my profile. I also have it linked in my link tree to make it easier. And my most expensive service is when I do in-person organizational trainings. That pricing varies on where I have to travel in person, how long it is, etc. If there are materials or not, all of those things. That's why I don't have one set price. But the set price I have for my coaching program, if you do all 6 modules, is $3,582. I also offer those in sections. There are 6 modules, and I offer bundling prices because I do want it to be accessible, and I don't want you to have to shell out $3,500 if you're like, I actually already know 3 of those things. I just need those 3 things. I offer payment plans. This is also not a program that is for people who are not already salary position around that almost middle manager. You need help to get to the next level. This is, hey, I'm a great individual contributor. Why am I not getting rewarded and moving higher? Because also, y'all are the people that need to get to the top because you're going to be better leaders. $3,500 is not cheap. I understand that. And again, that's why it's for this group of people who that raise to, once you're in like middle manager moving up, it's like a 15 to 20% salary increase on average. Of that, my program is 3 to 4.5% of what that costs, what that raise entails. So I sleep well at night, not feeling that I've exploited people. You can disagree with that, but that is my mindset. Because my mindset is I'm still delivering so much more value to that person than I'm even asking for. And I've contemplated, as the book has come out, I have had more demand for my coaching, and I've wondered, okay, so what do I do when I hit saturation? And it's not that I'll never up prices. I recently have. Inflation impacts us all. But I'll tell you right now, hold me to this. My dream would be to have a network of people who have especially different experiences with unwritten rules and marginalizations and things they've had to navigate, to refer people to have peers that we're sharing our knowledge and our frameworks and our experiences together to also give like the best experience to this person to help them get to the top. So anyway, that's the dream. So having multiple price points is one way. Having all the free content is another way. I do donate money to causes. I don't post about that because that just feels gross. I also, again, was raised very Catholic, and there's always that quote in the Bible that stays with me of your left hand shouldn't know what your right hand is doing when it comes to donating money. You don't brag about that. I think that's gross. As I said, I also turn down brand deals that I think don't align with my values. I critique capitalism on here, even though I think some of you don't see those videos or look for them. And I take the business risk. I take the business risk of being one of the few, at least white authors, who doesn't just write a toxically optimistic book about just lick the boot and it'll all be okay. If my business fails, it's likely going to be difficult for me to get back into a white collar job. I know this because I have literally written a book about everything they've done wrong and included stories of shit I have seen firsthand at my former employers. So it is a huge risk, and I sleep better at night knowing I take it than perpetrating it. So it's not perfect, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty of critique in this video if anybody watches it at all, because God knows whatever is happening with the algorithms about this. The questions we also all need to ask, because these are questions I also ask myself when I make these decisions, and I'm not pretending that I don't wrestle with this. Clearly, I think about it and I think it's worth addressing. The questions we also have to ask ourselves when we talk about the harms of capitalism is, one, how do you expect people to survive? How do you survive? What's your ethical line? If there's no ethical consumption under capitalism and no ethical business under capitalism, which if you're doing pure theory, there isn't, is collecting a wage ethical? Money always corrupts. How do we fund change work? What does socialism look like for you? Because socialist countries that do exist do have businesses. They differ in who they're held responsible to, what they're allowed to do, etc. But socialism has business as well, and people working, and wages. So what are you expecting out of it? If being external to the system is the only way to change it, then how do we implement the change when the external pressure makes those openings? When the system crumbles and the revolution starts, who is harmed? And if you're not seeing wages, or you're seeing wages for some things, who is expected to do things for free? Because it's almost always women, especially women within underrepresented communities, and people who do care work, social justice work, etc., who are expected to work for free and who get the most critique. And how does this all happen at once? Do we go from actively having to play tug of war with fascism to age-old bartering systems? Do we think that's going to happen? It's probably not going to happen overnight. And in between, what do? How do you survive? Who does it impact the most? This is part of applying theory to practice. So in conclusion, yes, I run a business and I charge for my expertise. I exist within a capitalist system, and the expertise and the skills that I have, I think, align best with discussing and addressing the cultural norms that go unspoken and reinforce harms and gatekeeping happening over and over again. Not the written rules, the unwritten ones, the social ones. You can call it hypocrisy, you can call it pragmatism, you can call it a realistic option, you can call it not enough. That's for you to decide. But whatever you do, decide. I am curious for you to tell me in the comments what you are doing. And I don't say that in a snarky, what are you doing way. I think hearing what other people are doing would actually give me a lot of hope. I would love to see that discussion more. We need people who understand the why. And we also need to understand and talk about the how. And I think now, with all this disruption, is the perfect time to do it.